if you are an engineer who actually comes and asks me, tell me what to do, you already failed the test. He came to me in a month and told me that's not an important problem. The best idea should win, irrespective of hierarchy. To go to a staff engineer, you need to lead an engineering team of like 10 people. That's like a meme. The reality is it doesn't matter. We will celebrate engineering depth. We will celebrate impact. You're an IC engineer. You could get the most highest level by having an impact on the business.
As you level up as software engineer, your scope, responsibilities, and impact, they all increase. And you become more of a product engineer as you understand your customer domain, your business deliverables, and you measure your results. That's exactly what we discussed today. And joining me is Praveen Murugesan, VP of Engineering over at Samsara. And we discuss what great engineering looks like, especially when the stakes are high. How do people act? And how can you incorporate that in your own day-to-day as software engineer? So enjoy. I was talking to Mo from ServiceNow a few days ago, and he mentioned there's a lot of room for growth in specifically a new engineering role, or not really new, but more trendy, I think, in the forward deployed engineer.
Yeah.
That is one role that I think is quite interesting. It's very much consultancy. It's very much understanding your customer, understanding your product, and then doing kind of a version of an implementation that is custom.
Yeah.
That role next to product engineer, especially with the introduction of AI, have been really on the forefront of my mind, I would say, as very interesting roles that are now more up and coming. From your perspective, I'm wondering what the difference is between when I say product engineer versus regular software engineer, and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think from a product engineering perspective, I think the main thing is you are already responsible for a product that you're shipping to customers, or you're working on a product that's shipping to customers. So you actually get the direct connection to the customer problem, right? So I would say effective product engineers who I've seen effectively grow really well, or people who actually understand the impact of their work, and they want to really understand the why of what am I doing, and why should I do this particular work, is something they deeply understand the context for. They partner with product managers really effectively. They're not necessarily people who are waiting to be told what to do, right? So you think about the job as building business context and customer context, and being able to effectively partner with product leadership to actually also give shape to the problem. Because one of the things that as an engineer, you always hold a unique advantage is you understand technology.
Yeah.
You also want to be somebody who keeps up with trends of technology. Today in the world of when you think about AI and there's a lot of tools available now. Historically, machine learning or building complex data products used to be dedicated to specialists. You have data science functions, or really engineers, or applied scientists who would do deep work. Today, it's become a lot more accessible. So a great product engineer can really understand what's possible with technology, understand the business context, and help develop the right solution, right? You almost shrink the solutioning phase is, I think, what great product engineers do. And it also ties back to a little bit of evolution of software engineering in itself. I think over time, when you look at it, a lot of software engineering was about the build phase, where people would anchor on the build phase. Whereas today, it's evolved quite a lot from a lens of you would see that the most effective software engineers, or even the people that grow themselves in their career, are usually the people who do the part of understanding the business context really well, being able to actually take that context and reshape ideas, and also partner effectively with product and other stakeholders.
Interesting.
And also just demonstrate this notion of extreme ownership, I would say, where an example would be in our case, if we were to run a project, right? And we talked about the concept of a technical DRI. Let's say if we assign a product engineer as a technical DRI, the expectation becomes from day one, they are working with their product managers to go understand business and customer context. And then from there, they are able to actually drive the entire project end to end, where like the engineer usually is the best person suited to see the through line of a project. Like an example when you think about it is like any product that you're trying to build has like a design phase, like product iteration phase, actual building, but then you go back to design and iteration, right? But ultimately at the end of the day, what you ship, the end product is something that an engineer built as like going through the entire development life cycle, right? By making the engineer the directly responsible person for some product to ship, they see the through line, and they are the best suited people to actually flag and tell you if you're like in like any organization on where the product is in terms of like health. Is it going to ship on time, whatever you planned for? What are the risks you're seeing? So that's also one of the reasons why we anchor on like this role of like, okay, a product engineer needs to be a technical DRI to see a product ship end to end.
But then what is the role of a product person in that? Because my assumption was, okay, product in the end is responsible for what ships. And I've seen some technical product managers when it comes to kind of a technical platform or product rather, and that can be a platform that caters towards engineers. But when you're saying, okay, I have a product engineer that's directly responsible individual, a DRI, what is the role of a product person there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think to distinguish, right? Like any product that you want to build usually like, has a very clear product definition phase, right? Which means it's actually quite a lot of work before you define what's even the right product to build. And it will be motivated also by many different things from, is there a common customer problem that you're trying to solve is like one thing. What's the business opportunity is another, right? So there's a lot of pre-work to the sausage making of building a product, right? So I think about product management is a lot more of like an 80% role is actually customer facing or outward facing, not your internal operations or management of a project.
Yeah.
Like project management is a very different thing and it's not the job of a product manager. Sometimes people confuse this, and the best companies usually leave to managing an individual project to internal people like a technical DRI or an engineering manager in most cases. In Samsara, where I work now, where it's fundamentally we've defined it as project management as an aspect of a technical DRI responsibility. And in some cases, when the project's fairly complex, we might tap into like a technical project manager, where it's like it involves 20 teams, right? Sure, like then it makes sense where you actually have some structure around it. But if it involves one team, an engineer who's a technical DRI should be able to do it. So we think about product management's more like a very customer-facing role. It's actually defining why we are building something, the business outcomes, etc. The second part I would say of product management is also really understanding and giving shape to the customer interfaces. So this could be the person who actually coordinates across the user experience and product design and also engineering. Like the person's actually like actively understanding the customer needs, what you're trying to solve for, and translate that into like the right user experience in collaboration with understanding what it takes to build this, which is where the technical DRI becomes a key stakeholder, where like the DRI will have an influence to say, for example, hey, this is the problem we are trying to solve. We could design this product in either way, A or B. A might take you like 12 weeks. B might actually take 3. And B might be enough to actually ship a first version of a product. So this is where that collaboration is super crucial, where having the technical DRI involved in that conversation sort of helps you both like de-risk, accelerate learning in general in terms of getting products out to market quickly, so you can learn quickly and iterate quickly, which is what is important to stay competitive in any industry today. Right.
And I see it scale way more easy that way as well. The thing is though, within teams, team of software engineers, that kind of, let's say, project management or more orchestrating, more operational thing, I've always seen that executed by a product person. What you're saying is, let's say, a product person that is only doing that for 20% and is way more engaged with customers and strategy and how does that fit into the business, will be able and better equipped to then steer bigger programs and much more teams working on that product vision. And I haven't been in a team, sadly, because I would love to see this, that has actually operated at that scale, where there are directly responsible individuals that take up kind of the technical program management, within their team or as responsible person for their team, and then solidly execute in that way.
Yeah. No, 100%, right? So think about this for like a second, right? Like an example would be, if let's say the project management or like reporting of a project is owned by, let's say, a product manager, right? They have to go through a phase of first information gathering internally.
Yeah.
Because they don't know which engineering projects at risk because they're not writing code in general, right? They also don't know about all the dependencies, and it shifts their job to be spending too much of their time now on like I'm talking to other people to collect status to like, report out.
That's what it feels like. Also from an engineer within that team.
Correct. So, but all of that's overhead, right? Like when you think about it, if you just make the engineer who's building it responsible for it, they see the through line. Like, why would you just not make the engineer responsible for it? Obviously, the one reason which is commonly cited is, hey, like, but it's taking away time from me to build, right? Now, this is where judgment comes a little bit into question, where like, at least the way we work at Samsara is like, we have a standing policy to say project tracking internally is like done by engineering, meaning it's a technical DRI by default. But in case the project gets a little bit more complex, it then falls on the shoulders of engineering management.
Okay.
If it becomes super complex, it's like one of these projects which require like coordination a lot, we will assign a technical project manager. But we will not make a product manager do it, which I don't think is the right solve, because you've just taken away valuable time to give and shape customer outcomes, which is what the role is about. Like, it's about managing the product, not projects. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. For me, when you were discussing kind of understanding the business problems and the context and mainly why we are doing things, especially early on in my career, I wanted that. I needed that. If I didn't have that, and I still have that to a certain degree, if I don't understand why we're doing this, it's incredibly demotivating because I'm just flying blind, and I can execute to a certain degree. That's just the discipline that I have. But as I progress in my career, I have less and less patience for being in the dark. Like, I truly need to understand if the ship that I'm on, if it's sailing in the right way, or if it's at least a vision that I can see myself behind, because otherwise I feel like I'm wasting my time.
Yeah.
Like, I don't just get joy out of executing. I want to execute, and as a result, have certain outcomes that align with a level of personal fulfillment, but also then what I see in an organization grow and have good business outcomes. That I feel like from a early on in my career perspective, maybe I was kind of, or I had these tendencies as product engineer. And now the fact that we are a lot of times in the dark, and there is a lot of engineering capacity and building becomes easier, then software engineers are kind of naturally more trending, or your unique selling point as engineer will be to understand the business and then be the silver lining throughout kind of the technical project to execute.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the things I loved from our conversation earlier was the fact that you've done both product and engineering. I think it's like one way where you can get a taste of both, right? And I think now, as you said, you become this engineer who probably cannot work without that business context anymore.
It's very difficult.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think the way to do it is like we talked a little bit about how do people get to those skills, and that's another way to do it, right? Like, but I would say, as I mentioned earlier, like the best way to do this is actually go find the environment which allows for this, right? So it's like what we're talking about is unique about cultures of how companies work. And it's something I would encourage engineers like to actually find out more about. Hey, like this is like, is this a culture or a company which is going to allow me access to my customers or who I'm working with? That's a question you probably want to ask as an engineer. And you want to find companies which sort of understand and celebrate this. And there are many of them, by the way, like, and it's also like an evolving, trend in the industry, I would say, especially with the advent of AI tools, etc., like where the building portion, I wouldn't say is becoming completely like eliminated or anything radical, but we know there's a lot of leverage people are gaining out of AI tools. A lot of the problem, the core art of engineering is problem solving with a business problem in mind and to create like a business impact, right? That part is not going away anywhere, right? Like problem solving as a concept is it's here to stay, right? We will always have new problems to go solve. And the tools to go solve those problems are helping us and become more simpler, which is what the leverage you're getting. And I think it's like the engineers of the future are just the people who actually know how to leverage these tools the best to go solve the right problem. So being able to build context and on the business is going to help accelerate companies. The more people companies have where they have demonstration of like curiosity to understand the business and like the customer outcomes, those companies will thrive. And like that's like I think what's happening in the industry in itself, and that you'd see more and more engineers who like companies will try to attract and recruit. Like I try to do that all the time. Is like find people who demonstrate a lot of curiosity and has a track record of like, you know, focused execution towards that curiosity, because that's equally important. And that's a winning combination. Like in a way, it's a very powerful combination, because when the more people you have with those skills, you don't really need to prescribe to them also like what to do. They would often tell you what to do.
Yeah, because they will not wait, and they will try and figure things out, and then they will start. Yeah. Is curiosity something that you can cultivate? Because for me, I've always had it for certain topics. I'm just very curious. When it comes to, let's say, deep tech and maybe even fundamentally how a lot of things work, I haven't been curious until I've had to apply it, which makes sense for me because like I don't like wasting my time to a certain degree. I still enjoy a lot of things that are time wasters. But when it comes to deep tech, I don't see the need of learning a lot of things with regards to that, because there is just an abundance of things to know until I actually am at a certain point where I have to apply it. And then it's scary because then you have to dive deep and you have to make it your own quite quickly. But that's always been a driver for me. Being curious at the right time or even in advance cultivates or kind of stimulates drive. And then where I see people lacking curiosity, I sometimes also see a lack in drive. And you can compensate that with discipline. But I also, as a team lead, a little bit closer to, let's say, engineering manager, if someone's not curious, I have no clue how to do it because I have it innately. And if someone else doesn't have it, I can't just say, have it.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very interesting question, right? Like I think when you think about curiosity, I think can be cultivated, but it's also a little bit of like individual choice. And I think that's totally fine, right? So we've talked about, in a way, like, so when I think about businesses, different businesses, right? Like people, the businesses are in different stages and businesses have different cultures, right? Like a culture could be like, I don't really believe that like, okay, whatever I'm saying is the only way to run an engineering organization or like, you know, develop products, etc. Right? There have been many companies over time successfully evolving, which has operated in like a very waterfallish manner of working, for example, right? And there's been companies that actually like I've seen people worked in an environment which is like boxed to say, this is your role, do that really well, right? In those cases, like what I would define it as is like, it's called focus, right? Like, you know, you have a very clear responsibility and having focus towards doing that is a powerful thing. So somebody, you might look at their resume and they would say, hey, like I actually built up a really strong skill set as an engineer. And I actually like was given this specific problem and then I did really well. Right? Like, and that person can be immensely successful, right? The question, if you ask me though, would I hire that person? I would probably say still no. I would look for like curiosity. And that's more my personal choice and the cultures that I want to build in like, you know, taking into account like the phasing of where the business I work at is. Like Samsara is a high growth business. Like, you know, while it's a reasonably larger size business with like billions in revenue, but we consider ourselves to be, the mission's like 10 plus years. Like what we need is actually people who can deliver with focus, but bring along curiosity because they have this multiplier effect in the organization. It's not just about for them getting what has been asked of them to be done, but they can also help shape or give way to what are the next 5 things we can do by short-circuiting some of the processes slash like just general product development approaches. Like we did talk about technical DRIs or like product engineering, which is where like, being able to be a good engineer with really good skills, you actually can focus and actually develop and have a track record of shipping products. But coupled with curiosity, you would know what is the right sequence to build. And also like you could actually have an influence on how you can help accelerate the growth of the business, right? So I think that's a little bit of a difference, I think. And I think it comes down to individual choices.
Yeah.
I do think though, the evolution of AI in recent times is going to push more of the industry forward into the direction of people that thrive are the ones who actually can demonstrate both curiosity and focus.
Yeah.
And we also see another way to think about it is even when you study engineering careers, there's always outcomes could vary, right? Like some people actually have disproportionate outcomes. They would actually grow themselves to be really senior engineers quickly, etc. And you usually could pattern match that to people who have both curiosity and focus. Whereas some people would still be very successful, work at really incredible businesses and be a part of that journey, but might not grow to those higher order influential roles. And that usually comes down to they might be very focused engineers and really good at their job getting stuff done, but they didn't really enable the impact of that business, which requires curiosity.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Curiosity has always been a big driver for me. And I also see that the people that tend to not necessarily be curious, they might be the most headstrong. Like when someone disagrees with me, I think it's interesting because if I have a certain perspective, if I have a certain vision, and then someone that I think is very smart, someone that I admire, disagrees with that, that means there is a learning opportunity. I'm not going to try and convince someone from what I believe, but I want to understand their perspective because then I can better judge what is in the middle, or is it mine, or is it his? And in the end, the outcome doesn't matter. I learned something. And the people that are curious, I've seen kind of not necessarily throw away their own opinion, but take this as an opportunity and learn from that.
Yeah, no, it's 100% right. Actually, what you said resonates with me, in terms of people that are curious, want to learn. I think learning is the driver. I think that's foundational, right? To give you a practical example that I actually saw was we had a product that which is about detecting some signals with data available. And we had this solution that was built long ago. But we almost got to a point where the customer was not happy and we'd thought, okay, we're hitting a wall or a dead end, right? Whereas when we actually ended up hiring a new engineer who actually started to look at this problem with fresh eyes. So he went back to sort of square one and question a lot of the fundamentals of how we thought about solving this particular problem.
Yeah.
And he was able to also reconnect and talk to people who had built the original solution and understand both their point of view. And then we kind of came up with this iteration, which was almost you could call it going back to first principles, erase everything that's been done. You've spent a year, but sure, right? Going back to square one and then rethinking how we should build this solution. And we were able to come up with a new methodology to approach the problem, which actually we are now rolling it out to customers and we are already getting very positive feedback on. So it comes down, I think, when I reflect on that particular story which happened in the organization, I see two things. One is yes, having people who actually bring the mindset of being curious about problems and being able to go to the depth. Also, it really helps you. The other one that I also felt that helped is and as you said, curious people usually come at it from. They usually also coupled with a mindset of collaborating. It's incredibly powerful because then you get you're sharing ideas between really smart people, and then you also bring the notion of the best idea should win.
Yeah.
We at Samsara, we actually talk a lot about meritocracy. One of the things that I enjoy telling people and talk about is the best idea should win, like wherever it comes from. We would have we generally like to celebrate the idea of the best idea should win, irrespective of hierarchy, specifically, right? Like, and I've usually always seen like the best ideas come from like everywhere. Like we have stories from like interns coming and having an impact by like kind of asking like the question which nobody thought about, and so on, right? So, but I think coupling curiosity with a culture where you actually can eliminate hierarchical thinking is incredibly powerful, and pulling people together in that environment usually results in like the best outcomes for the business, right? And like, when you're running larger businesses, you have to think about these as like more like, okay, how do you bake it into the company's culture? And I think, we try to do a good job there, like try to kind of celebrate some of these stories. And like when we see these instances, go bring it back to like an all hands setting and actually tell people this is what good looks like. So it cultivates that into the culture.
That's very nice. Like I've never been responsible for cultivating such a culture. Fresh pair of eyes is incredibly powerful, but the hiring strategies that I've seen, they very much still test on hard skills. I was at a conference and it was about technical leadership. And then we had an own conference. And I was like, I really want to talk about AI and hiring. Like what have you changed in your hiring process? What is still solid and what is different? And some people are like, well, we're still experimenting, or we do have a hands-on part of the hiring process. And then it's in a call. And then I'll say, well, I'll just jump back in 2 hours. And that person stays in that call and executes. And they can use whatever AI tooling. Other teams I've seen or companies that say, okay, we expect you to use AI. And we just do pair programming. So do whatever you do normally. And then I'll see that. But that is all very much with regards to hard skills. I'm wondering when you say, okay, I look for hard skills, but I also want you to be curious. And if you only have fundamental hard skills, by virtue of not having curiosity, I'm less certain on, are you going to be collaborative? Are you going to be asking questions on the business outcomes? Are you going to care at all? How do you then, in your hiring, because you are in the end part of the people that is responsible for this culture, and you want people to be curious to drive business outcomes, how do you make sure you actually find the people that go through and then are part of that company?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So the I think one thing we look for effectively when it comes down to hiring is like some techniques to actually check for these skills that I talked about, like curiosity and focus, particularly if you unpack it, like how do you go about it, right? So the first thing is we look for a trajectory of people over their time, like whatever they've done. Like, one of the things that you can always look for is like, people that have had like some degree of a trajectory, like would have usually done like or delivered outcomes for a business, which actually made them like, successful, and they got promoted in other places, etc. Right? And we dive into it a little bit more into the details. The most common question I end up usually asking people is like to talk about like one of their favorite projects and like why. And it's a little bit of an abstract, easy question which you might get. But what I'm looking to hear is about, the first thing is I want to understand, like, do you really understand why you built this product? What's the outcome? Like, this goes back to understanding the business outcome. And sometimes people tell me I was told to work on it. Okay. That's actually a flag for me. Like, it's like you just like went by somebody else's vision, but like you didn't really paint a vision yourself. So that's something I try to dig into, right? The other thing I look for is usually when people talk about their journey is actually like talk about or ask them for specific decisions they influenced and made, and the why. Like, and if you've really done the work which you picked as a project, you can talk to those details really well. And it actually, I look for some degree of excitement from the person talking about it. Usually the person who's really done it is very excited and proud about some of the things that they navigated along the way.
Really proud.
And really proud about it. And you can actually easily feel it. You can get it out of the conversation quickly because they know the details. They feel good about some things that they've done. They usually also get a little reflective on, I learned this later. And so those are all really strong signals. And then you look for two things. One, did they get the business context, the customer context? As you executed on this project, what did you do with that? Did you do anything with it? Is something I usually fish for. Like, okay, you got those contexts, you executed. Like, this was the technically hard part of it. All of that's great. But did you do something to either accelerate timelines, like make it a better customer experience, like think through the longer term impact of the product you built? Maybe like you made a technical decision with a forethought of, I know we've done this, but the next 3 things we are going to do is this, right? So those are incredibly strong signals. The other thing, which by default I look for, is like people's demonstration of focus. Like I mentioned, curiosity and focus being the other thing. Focus is you can only very clearly see where people have actually spent their time and shipped meaningful things over time. This is just almost like a test of time thing, right? Like, you sometimes have engineers who hop around all the time, like, a year, like into different jobs and so on. What I personally feel from my experience is like, if you really want to deeply build something great, you need to put your time and you need to actually like iterate on it and really be focused on it, right? So, and that you get signals by really understanding, have they worked on problems which they saw it from 0 to 1, or like, took it from some point to another major point, like almost like a step function change in outcomes for the business. And were they able to stay with it through the ups and downs, which I think is a very powerful thing to look for. Especially in today's world, it's extremely easy to get distracted.
Yeah.
We all know that, right? Like everybody is like so many sound bites around you, so many tools thrown out at you. Like focus is a really powerful thing. And I think a lot of the people who succeed would agree, say like, the curiosity and focus, I think, are the most powerful things. And I try to like really like look at that through deep diving people's work. Yeah.
In an interview, the first part that you mentioned of what is a project that you're proud of, or what are some of your fondest memories with regards to learnings or even failures that you can share, I typically ask that from an interviewer perspective, like from an interviewee perspective to my interviewer, because I want to see that same spark. If I'm going to work with these people, I actually want to, just like you, see if that spark is there, if they have done something at this company that I'm applying for that they are proud of, or that it's a failure and they've learned from it. I want to see introspection. I want to see proactivity. I want to see reflection and learnings, because then I know, for me and from my perspective, it's an environment where I can do the same. There is room for that. People are already talking about that. It's not the first time someone has asked a question like that. I don't want it to be something new that I introduce. Sure. I want it to be part of the culture that I'm applying for, which I think is very powerful. And sometimes from an interviewee perspective, you might think, okay, what am I going to ask? Honestly, just having a personal conversation and going on that level, I think is completely fine.
No, I think what you said makes a lot of sense, right? Think about this for a second. You asked me earlier in the conversation, like, hey, like, how do I, as a person, find an environment where I can become a great product engineer, a technical DRI, etc. This is a good shortcut way for you to get to an understanding if that environment actually allows for it, right? Because you're just asking the same question of like, what is it like to work here, right? Like you'd get clear signal around why somebody's saying that's, because either they worked in, and like for you to learn these skills, you need an environment to be very clear, right? Like, and not every company operates like this. Like I worked at different places and people choose to operate differently. So you want to understand if that environment is going to be like product centric, like the environment's going to actually enable you to be able to, is the environment actually going to tell you like, hey, show curiosity, like understand the business problem, or are they going to tell you like, go do your job? Yeah. Right? Like we told you to write code for these 4 tickets.
You might
like,
disagree.
Do you want to ship? Yeah.
You might not know why, just execute.
Correct. Yeah. And so that's something that you want to get a signal. So it's a perfect question for you to ask and look for the actual signals from like, a good way to understand the culture rather than ask somebody, okay, tell me about your culture. Like, okay, tell me about your favorite project.
Yeah, absolutely. I was speaking with Mo and then we were diving deep into the forward deployed engineer role. Yeah. And from that, I had the feeling of, okay, you have a lot of responsibilities on your plate. You need to be technically apt to know your product. You have to dive into customer contexts and figure things out and how to make that match, also understanding the business problem. So then I thought maybe it's not a good role for people that are early in career. And I'm wondering if product and understanding the business and innately early in career people might be more curious. They're not as jaded as people that have been in the industry for 20 years and have burned themselves just a little bit too often to be that way. So they have that drive. It's like a blank canvas, a real fresh pair of eyes. I feel like product engineers and that role, they are well suited for people that are more early in career. They can come in with a fresh perspective and really bring things down to square one with regards to reasoning and asking questions and learning from that perspective.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, right? I think so forward deploy engineers is something that we don't have at Samsara at the moment, right? But I think, I guess the fundamental way I would call the difference is like, you're building custom solutions where you need a forward deployed engineer who's working more with a specific customer. All our product engineers work on products that's like catering to like a larger customer base, right? So, but the customer interaction is still true, right? So that's kind of the crux of it. Now, when you think about is that role suited for like an early engineer or not? I generally don't believe that these roles are only for people with experience or like somebody who is like more earlier cannot do it, etc. Like I really don't buy into that school of thought. I think the key is if you are trying to cultivate that culture and like you want to have it in your teams, meeting people where they are with their skill set and then exposing them to some of these qualities, like which you want from product engineers in iterations. Like an example would be like, you might actually have like a small feature, which you could easily give it to a junior engineer who just maybe graduated out of school. And, but then you use that as a means to teach them, hey, like what's important here is for you to actually understand some of the customer impact, etc. A trick to do that, which I often encourages and which is highly encouraged at Samsara, is like getting engineers in front of customers, like have the product manager take the engineer to like even be a fly on the wall, like listen to a couple of calls. Like you benefit from these things, right? So it goes back to you then understand the why, and it helps you cultivate that mindset of like, okay, now I actually understand the why, so I could make better decisions. And the second thing would be like teaching them to measure outcomes. Like, okay, you shipped something. Can you actually proactively think about actually like understanding if what you shipped as a feature, did it get adoption? Like, why are people adopting it? And you could easily build out like dashboards, right? Again, like this, I would consider a role of a product engineer where you not only understood the why and you saw the through line to the product, but you also measured what happened. Like, and you form an opinion on maybe you want to work with your product manager and to find the next iteration of this product because it didn't really get the outcome you wanted. Yeah. But if you didn't measure it, how can you move on to the next thing, right? So, so those are small things that like I think any engineer can do. And I think the way to think about it is like as people level up in their careers, they're just taking more larger efforts or like driving more complex things. But the mindset to work with ambiguity or the mindset to lean in on customer feedback and get this context needs to be developed and can be developed from early on, right? Yeah. And so that's how we think about it. So not necessarily specific to like, oh, you need to be senior. I would actually highly encourage more younger engineers to look for environments that support these and and like try to cultivate these skills early on. Yeah.
I think what I'm about to say is relevant for both people that are early in career, but also people that are more senior. There will come at a certain point, you'll face a challenge with regards to it's something I've never done before. It is bigger than the scale of impact that I've had before. And I feel like in your position, you have many more conversations with people that are facing this, where you, from your standpoint, believe they can do it, but they, from their standpoint, they've never done it, which means sometimes there's a lack of confidence or even a high feeling of imposter syndrome. I feel like there's a lot of imposter syndrome in this industry, and it's due to the fact that typically we are doing a lot of things that we might have never done before. If you're doing the same thing over and over again, are you really growing or are you kind of coasting? Sometimes it's okay, and everyone's kind of family situation or personal situation is different. But for the people that want to grow, they will find themselves in unknown waters. And the more often you do that, the more confident you become. But there will still be an inkling of, can I do this, or is this beyond my scope? The further you grow in your career, the more senior you are, the bigger responsibilities you might get. And especially when the stakes are higher, it can stress some people out. How do you have that conversation with people where you truly believe they can do something, but they don't believe in themselves?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So when we actually rolled out this notion of technical DRI at Samsara, we actually talked about this, right? So we didn't think about it as a binary. Oh, like only it's reserved for senior engineers and above, or like special types of engineers, right? So we actually said we want to develop our entire organization to build these skills. Like as an engineering leadership team, we have a responsibility to develop our people with these skills because we believe this is important for the culture of the company, right? So the way we went about this was two things. One is meeting people where they are, like giving the scope of the problem that actually kind of stretches them. Like always like stretch people a little bit, but then meet people where they are. Like we don't want people who might have never done let's take an example, right? Like we had this project that we had to ship in 4 months. It was for a big launch moment that we usually have, customer facing events. And it had to ship in 4 months. And then I had to personally step in and say, okay, we're going to have like this staff engineer lead this project because it's a mechanism to de-risk an outcome. So while we had really good senior engineers on the team, it's not like we didn't have good talent. That was not a place to experiment because you had the stakes are too high.
It's just
right?
risk management.
Exactly. It's a risk management thing. Whereas in other cases where we didn't have that kind of we're not under a clock, we would take risks. Actually, we said okay, let's actually have this engineer in a couple of cases where they're motivated. Let's give them the role. In cases where people didn't want to push themselves or want to pick up a larger challenge, we would give them a little bit lower scope problem and say why don't you operate in this, but it still fulfills the role at your level. But then you're slowly developing these skills. You're not in isolation. We also went one step further and said, we actually want our junior engineers to develop these skills. So the way we are going to do this is an eng manager will be their backstop. But we're going to teach them along the way. You're building a feature.
Yeah.
You're going to be a technical DRI. You need to work with your product manager, get on calls with customers. You will actually define the solution. You will report on it, flag to us status issues, etc., and drive it through the line in terms of understanding the impact of work, etc. But then every step of the way will backstop you with an eng manager supporting you, checking in on you, making sure you're not stressed and distressed through the process. It's not saying either figure it out to do it or get out. That was not the intent. It's really this is from an intent of it's going to help you in your long-term career. And I think one of the things I try to tell people I work with always is a lot of these skills are not about just point in time going to help you in this job where you're doing today for this particular company. These are good skills to have, and you're just going to be happy that you develop these, and we're in an environment which wants to support you through that.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. One of the things I'm really fond of is my experience in operations before I did any type of software engineering. And then figuring things out that are running in productions and issues that can arise and the experiences of fucking something up and then really just blowing up something on production and immediately getting a phone call and being I really don't want to answer this,
yes.
But clearly they know it's me, so I have to, and owning up to that. All those experiences in the moment, maybe not as fun, but reflecting back, I'm really thankful for opportunities like that, where maybe I had a little bit too much responsibility, or I don't even know, and I wasn't even aware that this was a conscious de-risk opportunity for me to learn and grow. But I'm really thankful for those opportunities very early on because
Totally
they really accelerate growth.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. It actually brings a fond memory myself when I was just a year out of school and I was now owning the system at Salesforce.com. And my mentor, who was supposed to buddy with me on everything I do, he's checking all my work. He was actually on leave, and the system was owned by just the two of us.
Yeah.
And on that particular week, it went off, right? So, and I actually had somebody from the customer success team at my desk asking I need to report back to these really large big banks on what is going on, and do you have an update? And I was oh my God, it was
full panic.
Yeah, but I also have fond memories of that time where my manager at the time actually came to my desk, and basically they got the customer success rep out of my way, said, let him do his job. You can come to me for status updates. And then he pulled me aside and said, like, don't worry, just focus. I'm here to backstop you and make sure, like, we get through this. Yeah. And that actually helped me a lot. I was able to focus, and then like we found the issue in like the next maybe an hour or two. And then, and I drove that entire postmortem process, etc. Like it was the first time ever doing it, the first year out of school, like taught me a lot. And you're totally right. I think it's these experiences that shape you. In the moment, it feels hard. Like it's like people say, like, what doesn't kill you make you stronger. It's true, right? Like, it actually, like, you take these experiences and the next time you see it, it's like, you can handle it with a much calmer head. And you also learn, and you now aspire to push yourself to like, okay, what else can I do? Because you're now testing your own sort of skills here. Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the thoughts when you were explaining where we put our staff engineers are for projects that really we cannot afford to be risky here. Yeah. And then other projects where you can afford a little bit more risk, you put on engineers that first of all want this and have the drive, but also where you're like, okay, I do think they can do it. They just have to improve themselves. And then you have opportunities where there's room for people early in career that are enabled by other engineering managers potentially to grow. I feel like if you have an organization where the engineers are very driven, you need to have enough opportunity where they are in these positions for them to learn and grow. If there's not opportunities and they get bypassed maybe, then there's not opportunity for growth from their perspective. So you need to have this balancing act of having the right people and the right assignments for the job. Otherwise, it's a lack of fulfillment.
I'm laughing because I just heard this last week from
that's
somebody
really recent.
on my team. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think okay, I'll tell you the way I think about this specifically, right? I think the reason this came up in context was with AI leverage and with how the industry is shaping. A common thing that most people will be confronted with right now is like teams are going to be smaller. There'll be more teams, but smaller teams, because you can get stuff with some degree of AI leverage. Obviously, it's not like 100% there, but like, you do get leverage. But and a lot of people who get leverage more are people who are a little bit more senior, obviously, right? So teams are shifting in shape to be a little bit more senior. And this is happening across the industry, I would say, right? So somebody had actually asked me like, hey, but like if we have a little bit of a composition shift, like what do we do for creating opportunities for people? Like it's a very valid question, right? My answer to that was pretty much consistent and always straightforward, like where we are not making the shift only separately just on by dimension of saying that, hey, like teams are going to be a little bit more senior, etc. We actually couple that with also like relooking at our what does it mean for our engineering hiring and also like engineering career ladder, for example, right? Like most people, when you think about why do people feel this way? A lot of driven people want to grow to the next level, and they actually, there's an industry sort of meme, I would say, is where for you to go to a staff engineer, you need to lead an engineering team of like 10 people. That's like a meme, honestly. Like that's like how a lot of big tech companies operate, right? The reality is like, it doesn't matter, right? You want to grow to us staff engineers, senior staff or whatever, like all these titles vary by company. So, but fundamentally, when you think about the skill set growth that you're trying to deal with, it's like, can I take on larger complex problems that require a degree of ambiguity for me to go unpack? And the impact on the business is going to be a step function change for the business in the context of Hub. That's what the definition really of anybody who's a senior, much senior engineer is, right? Today, with the world shifting, I think one, we talked about a lot of more senior engineers leveraging AI as junior engineers to work with, right? So they're able to get more work done by gaining leverage. The ultimate measure of success for them is like, did I have the impact on the business? And now we've normalized it to say like, you don't need to actually like lead a bunch of people. That was just an industry norm in the past. And I actually drove this process at Samsara to say like, we will celebrate engineering depth. We will celebrate impact for what you have on the business. If you're an individual contributor, you're an IC engineer, you could get to like the most highest level by having an impact on the business. and also like, just be an individual contributor without the need to be like, oh, I need to be managing a team, or like, I need to be the more senior person in the team. So that's one thing we've tried to squash and move along, right? The second part, which you asked about, is like the opportunities, creating opportunities. We've actually flipped the script here to say a product engineer needs to go learn about the customer and the business. So my view on this is, especially for engineers who needs to grow beyond a certain level, if you are an engineer who actually comes and asks me, tell me what to do, you already failed the test. Like, my expectation is we'll build you an environment where like you actually have access to customers, you understand the business strategy, you actually like, have access to all the data from what's happening internally in terms of product usage, etc. We want people to actually come to us and tell us what to do, not necessarily like we prescribing or like, this is what you need to do. And that's the type of engineers that are going to thrive. It's at Samsara today, but also I think in the industry over time, right? So so that's what I would tell people. And I think the two things that needs to transform is like, companies in the industry need to move along from this idea of like, you only grow to bigger engineers by like leading larger projects. That means like lots of people. That I think needs to shift along. And I think it is shifting along, candidly. And the second part is the environment you want to create is for people to understand, create opportunities, etc. Not just be limited by like opportunities being created a little bit top-down-ish. Right?
I love
so that I think is extremely important. I can give you an example. To make it practical, I had hired this engineer who recently joined us, and I had originally told him, go work on this problem, right?
Yeah.
He came to me in a month after looking at that problem and told me that's not an important problem. I was like, okay.
He has some confidence doing that. It's good.
Yes.
It's really good.
And because I think what he was doing was he was observing where all the engineering resourcing was going, what is the more important problem and what is the complexity. And he was just like learning about all the different product investments happening. He was a much senior engineer. So he did, I feel like coming in, he was a very senior engineer. So he had he felt he had the agency and like to do it, right? And but I loved it that he came and told me like, no, I actually want to work on this other problem. And I told him why. And then he actually said like, hey, like, I think the current team is like a little bit struggling there. I think I have some of these skills, and I have also like a better idea of doing it. So I said, okay, you have my blessing, go do it, right? So he jumped on it, and my original intent was to, hey, like, he was going to work on the project and be done, right? So later he comes and tells me, I actually to develop this solution end to end, we also have some platform dependencies, which is owned by another team, and I need them to do something. I'm going to actually jump in and work with them and build this platform capability, which is going to help ship this product. But also, guess what? Ship 5 other things which we want to do in the next year.
Yeah.
Right? So he did that on his own. Like, I didn't tell him.
No.
Right? So,
but you did enable him.
That's correct. Yeah. So the general point here is like, you can operate this way. Like, it's just really, you have to find the environment that enables you. And these are obviously like the example that I called about is like somebody who's a very senior engineer. But my thing that I try to tell people on my team is like, I would do that for anybody, right? Like, and that's the environment I want. Like, you should come and feel empowered to have conversations. I think the only thing is like, usually as you go higher in levels in companies, you just get access to more context. And like, that's something that it's on us to share with more people, right? So, so that's the main way I think about it.
Yeah, I love that a lot. I think in environments where ideas win, and it doesn't matter where you come from or what your role or title is or how much experience you have, even if you have a feeling of this might be a good idea and there's room for you to have that conversation and to execute then on opportunities as well, that's just from a fulfillment level, I think that's going to be a blast operating in specifically.
Yeah.
Before we round off, we've talked about product management, or product engineering, but also organizational culture. Is there anything you still want to share before we round off?
No, I think the only thing I would say is like, when I look back at my career, whatever helped me, if I were to summarize it comes down to like fundamentally like 3 things, I would say. One is a little bit of an obsession to understand the impact of the work that I'm doing. Like, and it's actually extremely fulfilling when you do that, I would say. Like, so that's something that's, I think I would encourage people to really lean in and understand, why am I doing what am I doing? Like, answer your why, like, and so you find the work that you actually like, enjoy doing the most. And then while you do it, demonstrate curiosity and focus, right? So I think that helps you do that really well. But I think ultimately I found joy in like finding work because based on the impact that we do. Like I think at Samsara, it's like very real world as it gets on the products I work on. Like it has an impact on people's lives. Like we do things which affect safety in the real world. We do work on running the world more efficiently and like being more sustainable. It speaks to me in terms of meaning. And like the how we do it is where I have most fun, because trying to foster an environment of having a lot of talented, curious people and enabling them and like working on these solutions which are very meaningful for the world in a way where you're applying a lot of cutting edge technologies that's enabling it today is like incredibly fun. So I think I'd encourage people to like, find what's fun for them. And the usual way to go about it is like, answer your why. And also for optimizing your career, just think about like the impact that you could be driving, because every company out there will want people who can like kind of multiply the impact they are having in the real world.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing.
Of course. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, Patrick.
We'll round it off here. If you're still listening, let us know in the comment section what you thought of this episode. And otherwise, we'll see you in the next one.